if you think I'm
Good evening and welcome to Ganashot. Ganashot में आप सबका स्वागत है. Pranam, Vanakkam, Jai Hind, and Sat Sri Akal. Today we're going to talk about the soldier and the state, a perspective on civil-military relations, which is probably a very important thing in current times when societal rules are changing, the militaries are changing, and India is on the rise, right? And to talk on this subject, I have with me Admiral Suresh Bangara. First, let me welcome him. Sir, good evening and welcome to Ganashot. And it's an honor that you are here with us today.
I can't
Uh,
match your mustache.
oh, sir, that's fine, no problem. So you match more
Yeah.
than that in many other things. And what I'd like to tell everyone, and today we're going to speak in English because Admiral Bangara is easier in English. So you'll have the Hindi translation. I'll put it up immediately after this. Okay. Now Admiral Bangara has had an illustrious career, right? I was just going through his biodata. Uh, One of the top-notch naval officers who's retired. He's retired long back, and he's a very senior officer. Uh, Age-wise, he's pushing 78, and that's a lot of wisdom we're going to have in front of us. Uh, he's done all the professional courses. He's risen through the ranks, right from sub-lieutenant to vice admiral. He's an alumnus of Harvard. Not many people in uniform can claim to be that. He's done professional courses in Russia and UK. He's been a naval attaché in Islamabad. When? 85, 88, last century, right? He gets that wisdom perspective of Pakistan. So once he finishes with this talk, if you people have any questions about Pakistan and its history, please put it up. I'm sure he will be able to give the perspective of Pakistan, which he saw in 85, 88 at that point of time. Mind you, there were troublesome years when insurgency was just starting. Then, of course, he's been in the Integrated Defense Staff. He's been Commandant NDA, where he's trained a lot of cadets, Army, Navy, and Air Force, who today are senior officers. So many of the senior officers of his time, many of the cadets of his time are senior officers at the helm of affairs today. And he retired as a CNC of the Southern Naval Command, right? That much. But why is he talking to us today about soldier in the state? Admiral should be talking about maritime operations. He's talking to us about soldier in the state because he's done a lot of research on it and he speaks of leadership. And what's more, he's had a one-to-one talk on this subject with none other than Samuel Huntington, right? And who's Samuel Huntington? We all know Samuel Huntington was a person who wrote this famous book called The Clash of Civilizations and Remaking of the World Order. And he's very well known for this book. But he's not so well known by another classic of his called The Soldier in the State. And it's the theory and politics of civil military relations, which actually was probably one of the first times anyone intellectually approached this topic of civil military relations. So, with your permission, I'll give a slight backdrop to all this before we start. And here in this book, Samuel Huntington. He says about the officers. The officers have specialized knowledge in the management of violence. Important. They maintain a monopoly on education and advancement in their field and have an overarching responsibility to the society they serve. That's why the soldier in the state. And thus, they do not compete in the open market. No officer competes in the open market for what he's supposed to do or not do. Each step up in the hierarchy within the military profession demands more responsibility and skill because they are authorized to make more strategic decisions. In the case of the officer corps, officers are interested with evaluating the security of the state, providing expert advice to its leaders, and society in turn must afford a measure of deference to their professional expertise and institutions. But why am I talking of officers? Samuel Huntington says the principal focus of civil military relations is the relation of the officer corps to the state. Hence, the concept of civilian control of the military in a democracy has never been satisfactorily defined because it's a relationship between an officer and the state. It should be the relationship between the elected representative of the people, who are our politicians, who are our ministers, and who helm the government, and the mandated representative of the people, who are the armed forces. Why the armed forces officers and how are they mandated? They're mandated by the commission which the President of India gives to each of us. It the the relationship between the elected representative of the people who comes through the ballot and the mandated representative of the people, the officer who's commissioned. But in India, we have a dichotomy. It is invariably the unelected and the unmandated bureaucrat steps in to form some kind of a triangle. But that's what Admiral Bangara is going to address today. Okay, Samuel Huntington talks of two things, which I will read out. I'm sure during the course of the talk, Admiral Bangara will talk about this in detail. He talks of something called subjective civilian control and objective civilian control. What is subjective civilian control? The main focus is where military professionalism is reduced due to co-opting of the military by civilian political groups and civilizing the military. And this is found in history in many places, right? It is a denial of an independent military sphere when the civilian sphere encroaches and overrides the military sphere. It means also civilian control decreases as the military becomes progressively involved in institutional, class, and constitutional politics. That is dilution of the military ethos when the military participation in politics could eventually lead to subjective control. So the trend line of the armed forces people joining politics would invariably go towards subjective control or lend itself towards subjective control. That's a danger in the relationship between the soldier and the state. And then there's this demand for subjective control from multifarious civilian groups anxious to maximize their power in military affairs. This is a trend line which we have seen throughout our history. On the other hand, objective civilian control is what is necessary. This is where military professional thrives as it is far removed by politics. The Indian armed forces have thrived because of this to a large extent, but we've had patches when we've been under objective civilian control. Right? Objective civilian control happens when by militarizing the military and making them the tool of the state and not by civilizing it and making a tool of the political system. Right? And this is where I'm going to stop my talk and my introduction. It's a rather long one, but it sets the stage for what Admiral Bangara has to talk. So, all yours, please carry on.
Good evening, viewers. Shankar has given such an introduction that I can easily cut 10 minutes off my talk, and he's done it brilliantly. Um, so, first thing I need to tell you all is a couple of confessions. Before I tell you why I'm speaking to you today, am I really qualified to speak to you? I don't know, but I need to get it off my chest. The I am neither a scholar or a domain expert. By that, I mean that the scholars and domain experts tend to change roles very often. And as one of my old friends, Professor Sen, Gautam Sen, who used to run the defense department here in Pune, he used to say that a very thin dividing line between a scholar and a domain expert, and very often you see them masquerading one for the other. So I don't want to be accused of that. In any case, I want you to know that if you want to be a domain expert, as indeed I would today assume that role, then I realized that you cannot, in this particular subject, which is not really taught in any military institution seriously, and that I will explain is so essential and how it impinges on national security as a whole. So, after all these years, I realized that a domain expert who does not have the experience or not exposed to senior ranks of the military would be, it is unlikely that he would address the civil military relations correctly and in its entirety. At best, you can have opinions, but not your facts. And the facts emerge when, like Shankar and I, we've done long tenures at senior ranks, then you're actually dealing with the government, the MOD, etc. All other, I'll come to that a little later. So I hope to convince you of my assertions by capturing my own journey on the subject spread over 2 decades to authenticate or disavow theoretical constructs in the book titled The Soldier and the State by Samuel Huntington. Now, how did I come across this book? There was a system in the old days, which doesn't happen in the three services because of the pressure of the work now, that when a young officer came on board, the commanding officer, for example, on a ship, took charge of his training. And so very often we had these quiz competition, etc. And one of the commanding officers, when I was a young lieutenant, gave this book to me, fat book called The Soldier and the State, written by Samuel Huntington. That he wrote it in 57. By the time it came to India, we didn't have these little cameras and machines that you hold in your hand to gain knowledge, immediate, instant answers. So we had to go to a library, basically, or go and buy a book, which was expensive. Our salaries were so little. But when this prize was given, as a lieutenant, I didn't understand most of it, the theory part. The good thing about it is the title of the book was The Soldier and the State, the theory and politics of civil military relations. And as a young officer, I didn't understand why politics, why not practice of civil military relations. But for whatever reason, I kept this book by the bedside table, almost like a Bible or a Gita. So every now and then I would refer to it as and when I had a question. So this book came into my hand when I was a young lieutenant. It took me years after that to understand part by part the theory part of Huntington's seminal work, which was historical and contemporary analysis of the fusion or lack of it in CMR in various forms of governments. Although it was controversial after release, it turned out to be very relevant for many years to follow thereafter. So, in a way, I'm going to tell you the events that happened in my life, which I could not have planned, and nor could the personnel department plan it so well, because it happens as we grow. So there was no method in this madness. But I want to tell you, just as I was exposed to certain experiences, how I interpreted the book at every stage. I didn't talk about it. I wasn't competent to talk about it, but I interpreted. And um, I'll tell you what happened in my career. Um, this book is all about. First, let me try to define what is civil military relations, right? Many people have many interpretations. Simply put, it's all about exercising control over the one great asset called the military, which cannot be left loose in any country. So it started with all the militaries around the world, and particularly in the Western countries, who wrote all these publications, were under the control of the monarch, the crown. And so the king, the queen, the monarch, the crown, they always had total control of the military. So later, coming from the 11th century to 20th century, there was a movement on to change the system and to bring a parliamentary democracy at various stages, starting from Spain. So before the parliamentary system and or constitutional monarchies, etc., evolved, the word the monarch or the king that had to be renamed as civil military because the parliamentarians were civilians and they didn't have a lineage of the princely states. So the civilian elected head of the state would, or head of the government rather, would take care of the armed forces. So the concept of parliamentary democracy began, and it got accepted, and the word civil military relations started, as I understand. Now, as Shankar said, when you say civil, who's civil? Which is that civil category of people? I'll come to it a little later on why the government of India decided to do what it did in 1947 up to 50 to streamline our basically structures. So I'll come to that a little later. But a wide spectrum of civilian organizations would like to control the military. And paradoxically, that debate still rages around the world. And there is not a single country, including the oldest democracy, the United States, has resolved this conflict between the head of the state or the head of the government and the Congress, for example. So, which aspect and how does it impact in the functioning of the military is one of the issues that we'll address. Right. Now, the officer corps of the military is the functional or operational and active element of the military structure. They are responsible for the military security of the society. The civil society is an important issue that I'll come to at the end. State is the state is the active directing element of society and is responsible for allocating resources to all, including the military. Hence, we need to define the nature of the officer corps before we examine the responsibilities of the state. I'll first start with the soldier, then I'll come to the state, and then I'll get a concluding part where I'll talk about how civil society plays a role. So the ideology of the society and consequently the state plays a vital role in aiming to achieve an equilibrium in this important relationship. For ease of understanding, Samuel broadly categorized ideologies of various governments. He looked at the ideologies of the governments who are running the country to see how it impacts the military. It's an interesting part to observe. He basically categorized most of the government under conservatism, Marxism, Leninism, and fascism and liberalism under these categories. And he found there was a link between the fact whether they were military friendly with that ideology. For instance, the conservative or Marxism and Leninism were they military friendly organization, and if they're military friendly, are they pro-military, anti-military? Do they give high powers to the military? They give low powers to the military. These are issues were interlinked, and therefore, basically, what it implied is that, as he said, if you have your subjective control and you civilize the military, then you're not allowed to be professional, and that goes against the military ethos. The military is not meant to be sharing power, chasing popularity, chasing status and wealth. They are there for a specific purpose, and the minute they are diverted from that, then you have a situation when the military is politicized. So I'll come back to it later again. It took me years to hoist the content of this book. I might be a little dumb, but it took me years to, and why it took me years is I had to see, as I progressed in life, what I saw and what I read. So let's see, one full year in the Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, in a remote place called Vladivostok, far east. And that opened our eyes. We were the first democratic nation which went for training to the Soviet Union. And that's because the West refused to give us, in the non-aligned segment and pro-Russia, etc. They refused to give us arms and equipment that we wanted. So we were forced to go to the Soviet Union. But the Soviets had only trained Warsaw Pact countries and maybe Cuba. But we were the first. So when we landed there, we were put on an island and isolated from Vladivostok, which was a closed city because it housed their nuclear submarines, etc. And there was hardly any contact with the people in the city. We were not allowed to go ashore, as you say, in the Navy, because unless there was a boat given to you from the island, you couldn't go to Vladivostok. Now, in that way, they kept a track because they too realized that these people are highly westernized. All the education patterns are Western. They have armed and equipped and trained in the Western mode. And therefore, they may not easily accept our methods. And what is more, they're worried that their confidential aspects may leak to the Western world because we didn't belong to a communist regime. Genuine worries. But we were exposed to the rigid regimentation and the oversight of the military, the way they did it to a commissar, etc. But although I was a lieutenant, I was able to say what happens in a democracy and what happens in an autocracy or in a communist state. So that helped me to go back to Samur. 3 years I spent in Pakistan under General Zia. What did I see? I saw how he militarized every single institution in the government in Pakistan. And therefore, we are not trained to do that. And we are certainly that's not the way to run a country. So they paid the price forever thereafter. And it gave me a lot of lessons going back to Sambal. Just before that, I'd gone to Staff College in Royal Naval Staff College in London, which coincided with an important, looking back, I wouldn't have thought so at that time, but I'm connecting the dots. Looking back, the Iron Lady, Maggie Thatcher, came to power. And in my own course, I saw celebrations because they expected the civil-military relations to be, to improve substantially from the previous government. So there were real celebrations among the military men quietly. We are supposed to be apolitical. But Maggie Thatcher and how she changed the entire equation came to fruition when the first Sea Lord, Sir Henry Leach, can I have that slide one, please,
Yes,
Shankar, of the Admiral? Yes, this is Sir Henry Leach, the first Sea Lord, who fought the Falkland War 8,000 nautical miles away from British waters. And nobody in the right sense would have thought that they would go under the nose of Argentina and then fight a war there in their airspace with what they had. They only had jump jets, Harriers, and carrier and frigates and destroyers. And the entire supply chain was planned. And it was his pushing which made the prime minister to say, yes, we can send the fleet. As therefore, there was something in the man that I wanted to meet and understand. And guess what? Soon thereafter, 1982, Sir Henry Leach came on a visit to India. And those days, Admiral Pereira, who was chief, said, this chap has just come back from the Staff College and he's just become a commander. Let him be the chief liaison officer to Sir Henry Leach, and Geeta, my late wife, would be the liaison for his wife, Lady Leach. What is surprising is that we had this Avro aircraft that they would give us to travel with VIPs and the chiefs. It was nothing less than 7.5 hours flight from Delhi to the south if you want to go to Bangalore or south of Bangalore with a fueling halt. Now, this 7 hours in the air was my time with Sir Henry Leach. So I focused on, he didn't know the background, why I asked these questions. I focused on how he tackled a powerful iron lady called Maggie Thatcher and got her to agree to looking after the civil military relations of that era. and he gave me his views and what he had to do. It went down in my notes. I'm just telling you the opportunities I got, and still I wasn't very clear. So this was Henry Leach. You can take the slide off, please. Now, I had, of course, long tenures in the naval headquarters, in direct contact with the Ministry of Defense, and therefore I know exactly how it operates from the time I was a commander at every rank thereafter, handling the budget and the plans of the Navy. We have both under one head there, and the Vice Chief handles it, unlike the Army and the Air Force. And so, Staff Branch 1, I was also the Director Naval Plans, the NA to the Chief, Admiral Shekhawat, and came back as the Assistant Chief of Naval Plans. And after I went back to sea, came back and did a 3 full years as Assistant Chief of Naval Operations, IW Ops. We had IW as early as 1993 in our Navy. So all this gave me more and more access to the MOD. And that is the time the Navy decided to get some delegated powers, at least for the revenue budget. Since it was a small service and a beautiful service, the government felt comfortable saying, all right, we can experiment with you. You can have full control over your revenue budget. That was the first time in early mid-90s that we got control over revenue budget. Then later on, as you know, we have a little of the capital now, and the other two services have come on board. Now, that was the state when we had zero resources, delegated powers to the chiefs of the three services. Now, I also had excellent, shall I say, a view of how the CCS worked during Kargil. I was head of the Joint Planning Committee, so I had to report to the COSC, Joint Operations, and many of you may not know that all three services had mobilized during Kargil. It was war for us, even without government saying, it would be a war. We had moved, for example, the Eastern Fleet to the west. We had started our IW operations, and we helped the Army to actually, through a DGPS system, to locate the guns, Bofors, for the accuracy. We provided the EW Dorniers for operations there. And so with DGMO, Nirmal Vij and I were also NDC course mates. And it was a pleasure sitting and watching them work. And I had to make presentations to the CCS, the Prime Minister and his team. And that gave me insights into how decisions are made and how they allow you to fight the war without interfering in it. But the broad guidelines of what you can do, cannot do, outlined by the government. I thought it was a good example to watch. I also got involved in with Mr. Jaswant Singh. He was an ex-army officer. He handled defense for a short while. When he handled defense for a short while, when the then defense minister, had to step down for a coffin scan, investigation, George Fernandez, he stepped in, and I saw, being an ex-military officer, what he did was he carried a 2-star with him whenever he traveled the capacity of RM, and he gave the 2-star a role to play during the visit. For instance, he asked me to accompany him to Russia on a one-on-one conversation with the Russian Prime Minister, later President. Only me, an outsider, present, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing there. So at the end of it, I asked him, sir, was I supposed to record the conversation there or minutes of the meeting? He said, of course not. So I said, what was I doing? He gave me a task later, but he said, grooming, son, grooming. You must know how just not the military mind works. You must know how we think of the geopolitical system and geoeconomics. And then we come to the area of interest, South Asia, etc., Russia. This is a broadband discussion, and with two mature leaders gave me insight into how they think too. Now, after that, I had to work with Mr. Arun Singh on the Committee of Defense Management, in the sense, since I was JPC, I had to take that to the Chief of Staff. And there I saw how 148 recommendations to refine the Ministry of Defense alone was made by the Arun Singh Committee. And of course, again, it was serendipity. Out of the I got kicked up to first Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Headquarters Operations, and so I had to formalize, and I quickly finished that. The recommendations had to be progressed, and I had a very competent captain who worked in carrying files to the government and back. But the group of ministers monitored it so carefully that a whole range of things were changed. For example, delegated financial powers to all three services, the quantum, cross posting, both in the ministry and in the headquarters. We had Air Force guys in our war room, Navy guys in their war room, and all this had actually been implemented. One of the recommendations that you have to prepare for integration. The Andaman Nicobar Command came up. The SFC was in the pipeline, and there was no SFC when I was deputy chief. I was told to proceed with the organization and command and control aspects of SFE. What do I see? The only book, and I recommend this to all of you, written by Peter Douglas Fever, Guarding the Guardians. If you ever get hold of if you want to work with the nuclear command and control systems, you better read that, because I ran to a scholar and said, give me something to read before I can apply my mind. And I had to get this book from the US. So Peter Douglas Fever, Cornell University, please read the book called Guarding the Guardians. Now, all this was, what was it doing? It was giving me opportunities. And then, as he said, in Harvard, where I met Samuel Huntington, and and he sat me down and explained things that were gaps in my mind. Well, after retirement, I had 4 years with the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS in London. And I saw the hypocrisy of the West and how they deal with us, particularly. Although I had to do some discussions both at Geneva and in the dialogue in Singapore, you get to know how their minds work as far as India is concerned. And that was a good understanding. And therefore, by now, the young people in the audience must be saying, come on, get on with it, old man. Why are you telling me about this? I merely want to tell you that it takes a long time to claim to be a domain expert of some standing. It took me over 2.5 decades to say, okay, now I can open my mouth on civil-military relations vis-a-vis the theory. So before I launch into the issues raised by Samuel, for the record, I'm not totally in agreement with another author called Maurice Janowicz. And so I'm not quoting Maurice Janowicz. And also because I lack the bandwidth to do a comparative evaluation with all the jobs that I was doing. So I did it only when I had breaks, and I focused on one book to see, are we on the right track? So now, let's come to the hardcore issues. Soldiers. Now, when we say soldiers, for those civilians who may be listening to me, it means really all three services. We call them a soldier. I am happy to be called a soldier, but the officer corps, in the soldier officer corps, are you a professional or not? I ask this question wherever I address the military young officers. And there is always a murmur, yes, no, maybe. And then I tell them it took very nearly 70, 80 years of fighting in Europe to say the soldier is a professional finally. Why? Because technology has come in, and then and more complexity of warfare. You had to put through the officer through training. In the old days, the monarch just nominated some members as officers of his troops. So there were no training, selection, and so on. Therefore, next the question is, are you a professional? If yes, what is your profession? And I can tell you, other than one young sub-lieutenant in all my presentations, nobody could answer this question. And Shankar homed on to this particular paragraph and flashed it. So you have the answer. Management or containment of violence. because you have a profession. What is that profession? Management of violence. Therefore, what should you aim for? Successful armed combat. That is your function. And hence, we have to have the induction pattern that you have. University, first exam, competitive exam, UPSC, then you go to SSB, and then you medical, and then you come to NDA or wherever on that particular day, which is outlined. So you have to have an induction process. There is no shortcuts. Then you have professional training. You have rank-oriented responsibilities and throughout your color service, and the employment is planned. Now, if all that happens, you forget one thing, and that is a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer is also a professional. But someone asked me this question when I first, in my early days when I spoke about it. He said, they all have a license. What's my license? So I said, hang on, that's a good question. I have not applied my mind. And I went back and I kept thinking, can we have the parchment? Next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
The President of India gives this parchment to all officers when they are commissioned. And I'll just read it for those of you who can't. You can keep going up if you wish to, Shankar, because there
It
are three
doesn't
parts.
go up, sir.
But I will read it out. I'll read it out.
Right.
President says, I, reposing special trust and confidence in your fidelity. Many of you will run to the dictionary to say, why did he use the word fidelity? Courage and good conduct do by these present constitute and appoint you to be so-and-so rank, Army, Navy, Air Force, and the year. Then he says, I therefore charge and command you to discharge your duty carefully and diligently in that rank or in any higher rank to which you may from time to time hereafter be promoted or appointed, of which a notification will be made in the Gazette of India, and to obey such directions as from time to time you shall receive from me or any of your superior officers, and to observe and execute the rules, regulations, and orders for the governance of the Indian Army, Navy, whatever. And then he says, and, I do hereby charge and command the officers and men subordinate to you to conduct themselves with all due respect and obedience to you as their superior officer. Given at Delhi this day, signed by the President of India. All of us get this. What do? We frame it and place it on a wall, or we pack it and put it in a, because nobody has told us the value of this. This, in my view, is the license to practice your profession. Now, I may be totally wrong, but I couldn't find another answer. So maybe Shankar has some answer. But
No,
I
sir,
have
let me interject here. There is
Yes,
no
please.
other answer because you are mandated. The Indian Army, the Indian Armed Forces officer is mandated by this commission to manage violence for the security of the nation.
Absolutely.
This is the only way I can put it.
Yes. So now I'll quickly run through a few boxes that you need to tick. Oh, I've already overrun a little time.
No problem, sir. Please carry on. Finish at
All
later,
right.
sir.
So once you're in this environment, you understand, and it's a no-brainer. The military can only be used for socially approved purposes. State always enjoys monopoly over the military. Other ranks and application of right. Now we say there are many other ticks that I will come to, but I have to say a word about the other ranks. Most people cannot answer this question, particularly when you had induction of artificers who came directly into the Navy. I don't know about the Army and the Air Force. They were highly qualified compared to their counterparts in real terms of education, because those days there were only graduation also was not common. It was people went to 10+2, etc. So these guys became cocky and said, we seem to be more qualified than the officers. Why should we salute them? Now there was no answer because nobody had given this a thought, and it became worse when they came back from Soviet Union, because there was a few of these brainwashing sessions done behind our backs too. But they learned, as we learned, there's nothing called a community that is privileged or underprivileged, or of equal status, because free free people are not equal, equal people are not free. So this is something I learned when I was there. So now, when they asked this question, we said, "Look, chum, you have been inducted in the other ranks. You are not in the management of violence bureaucracy. You are a trade. So you are application of violence. You may operate a gun, you may operate this or that, an engine. You are an application of violence, not a profession, but a trade." This important question could not be answered because people hadn't thought through it. But the fact is that therefore, there is no a single hierarchy which goes from a sailor to a general. No, we are very selective in making the sailors into officers. The special entry, as you know, you call it at different names in the three services. They are in their mid 30s, maybe, but they come in for a definite role, and therefore their induction training runs into 3 year alone in the first part of your training. That doesn't happen at that level because they don't have to do management. It is application. And therefore, there's a big difference. You might be from the same village, neighbors, but he went through professional military training, which lasted 3+1+1 before he got out. And you only did it everything under 1 year. So, because it was the requirement. And therefore, no single hierarchy is known. We cannot be mercenaries. That also is known. We are governed by rules, laws, traditions, and strict discipline. Because you break any of this, you don't have a soldier thereafter. But interesting part is you are irreplaceable. Now, what is that? Let's take a fighter pilot. He he does hours of flying to command a squadron. He has to be a certain rank, and then at that rank, let's say a group captain, he has already got enough flying experience. But supposing he were to step out and you want to replace Group Captain Gupta with somebody from the civil commercial flying, you can't. Because commercial pilot may have 10,000 hours, but he doesn't have anything taught to him on combat. So, and that too at steps, how to fight from the basics to that squadron level. So he cannot come and replace you. But you, after leaving the service, provided you pass all the mandatory examination in the civil field, can become a commercial pilot. So then you'll ask me, then why am I not promoted if I'm irreplaceable? Yes, to replace Group Captain Gupta, it will take that many years to replace him, really. But that's a different issue. So we will not talk about the pyramidal structure of the promotion part. So there are restriction on your fundamental rights, and all my work of duties of soldier leads to a conclusion. Fundamental rights, you came as a volunteer. We didn't coerce you to join. But by then, you know what are the fundamental rights, right to travel, right to speak, meeting the media, etc. Barred. And that is to be understood quite clearly. So all this brought me to the conclusion that in a democracy, people elect governments, the military serves the government of the day. You can have strong political leanings while voting, by all means, but to remain apolitical whilst in uniform is a must. And so you have to avoid discussion within and without, particularly on the social media and WhatsApp groups on issues which are political. The moment you do that, you have sacrificed one of the orders given by the president to you. The only option you have, if you have social political differences, resign your commission and go home. If you have serious disagreements, you volunteer to serve. Therefore, this is one thing that you have to understand. The same breath, I have to say, on the contrary, a veteran is free to discuss politics. He is a citizen after he shed his uniform. So it does not apply to him. There's a false thing to say, oh, veteran cannot make statements on this. No, a veteran is free to join politics too. We need more experienced veterans in the parliament. That's another matter. We'll come to that. But it is Therefore, once you shed your uniform, you have all the rights as a citizen to do whatever you want to do. Now, we'll come to what I have written as political dilemma. I want you to, I'll just make one quote from Samuel's book before we enter the political dilemma. I quote, "The real world is one of blends, irrationalities, and incongruities. Actual personalities, institutions, and beliefs do not fit into neat logical categories." This is unquote. This is something we have to bear in mind when we look at the civilian organization. We are trained to see everything in black and white, right and wrong. We cannot afford to be ambiguous or ambivalent in our duties while leading men into battle, for example. The theory of CMR, originating from the largest democracy, this is Samuel's words, and I quote, that in the US, the theory of CMR in the US, I quote, is a confused and unsystematic set of assumptions, set and beliefs derived from the premises of American liberalism, unquote. That is to say, that the interpretation of the Constitution cannot be only an academic exercise which forms the basis for legal eagles to come out of similar reputed academic cradles. Hence, the clash between liberalism, which underpins the society at large, and conservatism, which is the basis of the Constitution, has to be resolved. So, if you look outside and say, what is so different? The UK has no written constitution. I don't know how many of you know that. It's a set of documented traditions, practices, legislatures put in a manner. There is no fixed constitution. So it gave them the resilience and freedom when globally deployed for occupation and wars. Is India unique in its practice of CMR? Now we come to India. For decades, we practiced the most lopsided apex level structure. And why? Partly because neither the military nor the bureaucracy knew the structural models of CMR. It was not documented, it came much later. Even US didn't have a book like Samuel's book. I dare say ideological beliefs at the political level were taken to be the most expedient solutions. And isolating the armed forces by making them attached offices of MOD, reducing their status and pay and allowance. Partly this was needed as the power vested in the CNCs those days, who headed their services, were derived from the wartime needs. War had just got over. Even the Americans, the British, everybody had to struggle with this to say, now you got to downsize. We don't need that sort of a number. And then we have to also see whether the pay parities, etc. So that was one of the compulsions. Now, this was equally applicable to other countries as well. In 1947 and up to 1950 was significantly different in many ways. The victors of World War II were downsizing their own militaries to adhere to demands of peacetime. The vanquished in Europe and Japan were occupied and administered by using military personnel. Rapid decolonization witnessed a panoply of military coups around India. The threat of a coup was one of the threats that the civilian bureaucracy used very liberally to scare the politicians who did not understand the basic ethics of the military. So what happened was, even as late as Sam Maneksshaw's time, Mrs. Gandhi had actually called him and said, I believe you're planning to take over. So this thing remained at the back of their mind because everyone had a coup around us. So that was a genuine fear. The military was dealing with partition, war with Pakistan, the structural reorganization of MOD, along with allocation of transaction and business rules, which created the ministries, which was duly authorized by the president. Not much consultation with the military was considered necessary. After all, military proposals had to be vetted by the defense secretary alone and his team because we were attached officers to the Ministry of Defense. The chiefs had no delegated powers in many of the decision making involved with running of their service. Every file went to the table of a joint secretary or below, deputy secretary. And the only person who had continuity in the ministry was that Babu, who was from the Armed Forces Headquarters, cadre, or Babu, who served there 20 years, who knew which are the files to be taken out. But imagine the load of the three services and their plans and their demands for equipment, files piled up sky high. But we ran with this system for decades and decades. And after all, uh, I also recall that there was nobody competent in the Ministry of Defense to make a brief to their minister when the commanders' conference was coming around. So we were told to make briefs, send the reply of the minister's statement, give us a draft. We gave a draft and heard our own speech, sitting to and listening to the prime minister. Because they came from various ministries, they didn't have an understanding of the defense as evolved over time. Of course, they become much more experienced now. But I saw people, even at the joint secretary level, who came in and he could not understand ranks of people. And one day I asked him, "Why are you looking so confused?" He said, "Oh, you guys have stripes like zebras in winter, then you wear something in summer. How the hell am I supposed to say whether you're a junior officer or senior officer?" So I said, "How do you then make up your mind?" Poor chap died in the chair. But he said, "I look at the way he knocks at the door and said, 'May I come in?' If he says, 'May I come in, sir?' Some junior guy. If he walks in and says, 'Hello, how are you?' Then he's a senior guy before I can read his rank." No, even that was a major issue at one time. So what was meant to be reorganized completely, in retrospect, it would have been wiser not to place the three services headquarters as attached offices of MOD. Stripped from any delegated financial powers, decision making powers, services were left to fend for themselves. Was it a way of cutting the military to the bones, isolating military institutions from society, and reducing military influence to negligible proportions? It was as late as mid 1990s that the Navy got, I told you, delegated powers. It took Kargil, Subramaniam Committee, and the many subcommittees, including Arun Singh's very interesting report. Yeah, I don't know how many of you could read it because there is a classified and unclassified version on defense management to correct all the flaws and infirmities that existed in the system. So these 120 reforms that was given were strictly monitored by the group of ministers. And then what happened? The government fell. And the incoming government, as always, had no time for any of this. So all these recommendations that were being processed by the group of ministers and checked and were all stopped. By the time I'd even left the idea, so I can't even talk about it. So if what all did happen, as I told you earlier, they were when we started doing the SFC, we had Op Parakram, we had to militarize the weapon systems. So then I had to go and ask Dr. Chidambaram, who was a scientist at the Pokhran 1, as you know, and 2 as well. Chidambaram, who was also the principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister. He headed that committee because this issue of DRDO, the civilian control of the weapons, etc. So all that had to be done till SFC came in and they've taken over the. So one issue that remained in 2002 was the decision on the CDS. ANC got cleared, SFC got cleared, IDS got cleared even without the CDS. And the term CISC was invented on the run so that at least IDS will have the experience till the actual decision is taken. It took 20 years more for CDS to be created, but there was a master stroke. DMA I can't recall in any of the recommendations. And DMA being brought in, they were all military affairs, other than budgeting, etc., it's very much a civilian function. So that has happened now. For any such system, whether it was the American Goldwater-Nichols Act and 1986, pushing integration, all that takes about 10 years minimum to settle down. So don't expect magic in any of the new systems. It's now let it be said, but let it be said, in the absence of a clear authority, responsibility, accountability matrix at the apex level, we may pay a very heavy price when tested next. So, theaterization, all of which is in the CDM and the Committee of Defense Management report. Right. I'll come to the last part, is the part on the civil society. We've dealt with the bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy was the advisor, the only advisor to the to the Raksha Mantri, and now you have direct access. The CDS is a one-point advisor, which is excellent, and then things will happen the way they were designed in the report. Now, the civil society, the role of civil society, in my opinion, is more important than anything else, and here we have a role to play. The success depends on quality of civil society. Civil societies are also uneducated, people. Who are they? They're elected. You and I come from the same civil societies. We know how the election takes place. There are people who don't understand anything about defense, but we will evolve. All democracies went through it. We are only 75 years old, so we have to be patient in this evolution, which is happening. But we have very qualified and respectable ministers who are, they're all domain experts as well. So, in all other spheres, things are settling down. Now, it is the civil society which is supposed to push the government to look after the soldier, not the soldier pleading, going around saying, "Give me this and give me that." The war memorial, is that the duty of a soldier to create a war memorial? You damn it, you fought. Somebody else has to do. Who's that? The civil society. If the civil society takes the lead, the election part of it will get taken care of. If defense is one of the issues where the civil society is well equipped with aspects of defense, then they will make sure that when they select their candidates, they will also look at people who have some knowledge. So the civil society is also evolving, and this is all contained in the Arthashastra when you know the advice given to the king to say how to raise an army, maintain an army, and look after the army after retirement. All this is there. So we had this knowledge, but it was not put into practice. Now, how do we awaken the civil society? Uh, the role of the armed forces, in my view, was better known to the citizens of this country during World War II than it is today. I realized when I was Commandant NDA that nobody understood what's happening inside the walls of NDA. They were just told you appear in so and so exam. We had shut everything, all the gates, not open to public as they ought to be, and knowledge in Pune might have been there because they are proud of NDA here. But if you went to Northeast and talked about NDA, nobody knew. So we had to make a movie on the NDA, a professional one, and send it to every school in India, whether it was central or not, and say, please, we invite you for the next passing out parade. Why do we have in passing out parades, generals and admirals and all sitting? They don't need to come for your parades. Who do you need? You want people you're targeting of the younger variety to come and attend these parades. They're taken around by a cadet to the NDA, will proudly tell them what happens. Now, therefore, the knowledge of the military is almost zilch. Now, how was it so good after World War II? 2.3 million Indian soldiers fought some of the bloodiest battles, and 90,000 people lost their lives in World War II. Indians. About 400,000 Americans died, about 388,000 British died. But they started the war, it was not our war, basically. Those that returned to India after seeing these horrible conditions told their stories to a total population at that time of 30 crores. So it is well throwing water, fireside chats, whatever you want to call them. It traveled by word of mouth as if social media existed. This is the fastest social media in a village that you could have met when people gather around the well or various places where matters are discussed. So the knowledge of an average Indian, I recall, even a teacher in the school would talk about what a difficult line the soldier, what a war means to a soldier, because they all heard it from first hand from people who fought. Therefore, there is much to be done even by us, because the civil society memories are short lived. Kargil was brought to their drawing rooms, television. We made a lot of mistakes in allowing journalists to go where they ought not to be, but we learnt it. And we had a daily briefing. It reached drawing rooms. There are some solutions. I'll stop there. Use of electronic media, which you're doing very well. Very nice little clips are coming out on all the three services. And now it's available on a cell phone, smartphone. So it's reaching every part of India. Compulsory military training through NCC. I'm one of those NCC products too, and we learned so much about the rank structure and what the each service does. It helped us a lot. So maybe induct ESM of repute into politics. We need Jaswant Singhs, Kanduris, and Shankar Roy Chowdhury's in the parliament, and then the civil society will sit up and take notice. When the World War II stopped, my last bit, the de-induction was so heavy in the United States, for example. People who were de-inducted went into various walks of life, including politics. Some made it to President of the United States. All your famous electronic companies that came up were headed by ex-servicemen. We have the short service commission officers now getting into management jobs after their short term and IAMs and so on. We need more of that to spread their knowledge, because they then understand the value of a soldier. So finally, I hope it wasn't like Harry Belafonte. If those of you know, he had that famous song in which he said, "It was clear as mud, but it covered the ground. But the confusion made my brain go round. So I grabbed a boat and went abroad and asked so and so in Baton Germany, Sigmund Freud. We don't have a Sigmund Freud. You got an old admiral who is all set to go up. So now you can shoot your questions, send me, give them my email, and I'll be happy to tell you what little I've gathered. Thank you very much, Shankar.
Thanks a lot, sir. I thought that was a fascinating tale you said about the civil military relations. You didn't talk to us, you told us a story. And I thought, let me pick some important things which you said, and it's not going to come chronologically to all our
Yeah.
viewers, and I'll put it as I noted it.
Yeah.
He said the first thing which I will not forget is free people are not equal, and equal people are not free.
Yes,
We are
I
free
learned it
people.
there.
We are
Yeah.
free people. India is a free people. We might not be equal to each other, but you look at
Yes.
a communist country, which is where people are
Yes.
supposed to be equal, but they're not free.
Egalitarian society. Never.
So never. So there is a problem in that society. Now, the next part, the continuation of this is what the admiral said. The soldier is not replaceable. The leader is not replaceable. And that's what's happening in the PLA. With so many sackings taking place and so many things going. So you look at both these, the connect between equal people not being free and free people not being equal, and soldier is not replaceable. And you now see fit this into the PLA. And now you will understand why I say the PLA leadership is poor. And if the leadership of the system is poor, how it will manifest in everything else. The next thing is he in the beginning he said there are four types of government: the communists, the conservatives, the liberal, and the dictatorial form, and all that. The strongest of this, from a military security point of view, through history, has been the something between the liberal and the conservative form of government, right?
Absolutely.
Where there's a distance maintained by between the military and the civilian setup, and that is where the conservative government of Margaret Thatcher comes into play. The way the Falklands War was handled by Britain, 8,000 kilometers away, it's no joke. Today, China can't cross 200 kilometers of the Taiwan Straits. Remember that. Okay. Then, of course, the issue of being a political while in service, and you could be political after you quit service. And for a large part of your life, if you've been apolitical and it is mandated to be apolitical and it is necessary to be apolitical because you can then judge the military situation leaving the politics off. That's my own experience. Beyond your uniformed life, very few of us can become political. It goes against our fundamental ethos, and that is why there's not enough participation of the armed forces officers in the Indian political scene. And of course, the Indian political scene has its own characteristics, which I don't want to
Yeah.
criminalization and corruption and things like that, with which the armed forces officer is completely at odds and he doesn't write. Then, of course, there's always, when you talk of the civil military equation and relationship, there's always this worry through history. It's not peculiar to India of the fear of the soldier turned dictator. It has happened all over the countries, all over. I'll not go into this thing. So, that is something which we have to always overcome. And today, as our democracy is strengthening, this fear is also going away. And slowly, layer by layer, the civil military relationship is getting stronger. That is why you see the change which has happened over the past 70 years, where now the government is reaching out to the military on a one to one basis, and the bureaucrat is at there's a beginning where the bureaucrat is being kept in his place. I wouldn't say sideline. A bureaucrat is necessary for the
Yes.
civil military equation to function because the civil and the military can give orders, but the bureaucrat has the one who's to execute it. The execution comes from there. He's
Yes.
needed, but he's being kept in place. But more is required to be done if we have to rise as a nation. Then the very major issue of the connect between the military and the civil society. Till probably Kargil, we didn't know what the government, I wouldn't say the civil society did not know what the government, army was, armed forces were doing. And
Yes.
for a long period after Kargil, again we forgot. Now with China sitting on top of us, the way it is, and the way it is threatening us on all spheres of our society in a multi-dimensional form. We talk of multi-dimensional warfare and XYZ. And as India raises, it poses a threat to our rise. And this is where now the military is coming back into focus. And today, let me put it very emphatically that the civil society has started wanting to understand the armed forces. And what I have done, this very channel, is the effort to bridge the civil society and the armed forces. And I keep
Yes.
telling that the idea is to democratize strategy, to democratize defense, so that the people of India own defense of India and then push the politicians to defend India better. And then the politicians enable and empower the military people to defend India better and enable the officer and his cadres to manage violence for the security of the state. Right? And last but not the least, my own thinking is that it takes a war or conflict situation to actually sort out civil military relations because at that point of time सब नंगे हो जाते हैं अगर आपके पास सही आपने काम नहीं किया तो देश का हानि हो जाता है and with this I will with your permission sir I'll take a few questions. I thought it was a fantastic talk.
Certainly.
It's a little over time but that doesn't matter because in
Yeah,
this
I'm
kind of
sorry
a
about
talk
that.
no, sir. In this kind of a dialogue, time is not of essence. And because such a dialogue transcends time and may it goes to the next generation also. And that is why, my folks, please give it to all your friends because it's invaluable. We'll always understand Pakistan, we'll always understand China, but this is a subject which we will very, it takes some intellect to come and tell you about